You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. The Rewilding Earth podcast is supported by businesses such as Patagonia, Catula, and Biohabitats, as well as the Whedon Foundation and listeners like you. If you love the work that the Rewilding Institute is doing, please consider donating at rewilding.org. And be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter while you're there. Environmentalist and activist Terry Spahr left the corporate world to research, write, and produce 8 Billion Angels, a documentary feature which exposes overpopulation as the upstream cause of all of our environmental emergencies. Terry is the founder and executive director of Overshoot, a nonprofit designed to promote public and private action to make ecological limits central to all decision-making. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania College of Arts and Sciences and Fels Center of Government, Terry lectures on issues of sustainability to students, investor groups, and civic organizations. He's also a regular opinion writer for a variety of environmental publications. Terry, thanks so much for being on Rewilding Earth.
You bet. Excited to be here. Thanks, Jack.
We were just talking before this about how consumed you must be with your current project. Can you tell everybody what you're working on and why it's so important to you?
Left the business world about 3.5 years ago. I've been growing more and more alarmed and concerned about the path we're on as a society and where the world's heading. And I began and embarked on a mission to be able to communicate my concerns, and I decided to use the medium of film to do that. So we have been producing a documentary for the last 3 years that we are practically finished. We're about 2 weeks away. Should be ready by the end of April here in 2019.
That was my next question, because reading over the site, following you on Twitter, it's been an anxious time because I'm thinking this is going to be really good. And also the message of hope around this. Like, it doesn't have to be this dire situation.
No, it doesn't have to be that way at all. No way. And in fact, I think when you look at the benefits of the topic that we bring up about the impacts of overpopulation, when you address these things in countries that have addressed it, have really seen incredible improvements in social justice, health equity, and just security, financial security, and just economic and educational opportunities for women and children too. And best of all, nature begins to actually heal.
We were just talking last episode to Randy Hayes about Nature Needs Half, and he brought up the idea that a lot of the things that people are really fired up about right now, where in the past we would have been very excited that people were talking so much about climate change, plastic pollution, the oceans, all that kind of stuff, is really, you can't go very far on social media and in the news without seeing something about that on the daily. That's usually where it stops. So I said in that, and you can give me some feedback on this, it seems like the perfect time to be talking about something like this, which seems, when you bring it up, you get the reaction like you're a radical or something, or no, you don't talk. And that's just if you're talking about with people from certain conservation groups. That's not just Gen Pop. That's just, people in our ranks, so to speak.
No question. I think one of the challenges that the public feels is that, yes, we see these signs. We see, as you said, the climate change, the storms, the oceans are warming, the corals are bleaching. I think one of the gaps is people don't understand, what do they need to do in order to be able to live sustainably on Earth. And I think that there's a lot of misconception out there in the world, because no one really has drilled it down to what does it mean to an individual basis. And I think what's critical, Jack, is you have to look, and that's my concern why I got into this, is I don't see people really trying to solve it. I mean, it's very good that they're trying to say, hey, we need to, get to renewables. We need to stop using more plastic and all those kinds of things. But, the end of the day, we've got to be in balance with nature if we're going to survive long term. It's basically right now we're in what we call overshoot. And if you look at our nonprofit that we've established, it's called Earth Overshoot. And right now we're exceeding our carrying capacity as a species, and all the signs are telling us that. So at some point there's going to be a reconnoitering of this fact, and we're trying to address it before it happens, so we can handle it in a humane way as opposed to nature's way, which is not very humane. Nature's nature, and nature will dictate how nature wants to do it.
And everybody can check out earthovershoot.org to find out more. Who is it that puts out the month of the year that we've gone over our carrying capacity? Are you guys involved in that part, or?
No, that's a wonderful organization called Global Footprint Network, and they're very good. We take a lot of our information and our data that we gather. We go to their website, and they're really good about having excellent data on biocapacity and then human consumption and human emissions. And they tell you whether, what countries are in deficits and what are in surpluses as far as who's living within their means as a country and who's living beyond their means, and polluting and emitting waste too much and consuming too many resources for the size of the country.
If I recall, it was somewhere around August last year that we overshot.
Essentially, they say exactly. They're saying we basically need about an Earth and a half to handle all our needs without experiencing overshoot. And when you look at that, and if you drill that down, what they do is they actually look at it from a land need, and they say, hey, each and every person, all 7.7 billion of us out there, use about 7 acres of land, or about 2.84 hectares. And we need to be, all the scientists, all the economists say that we have to cut back our activity, our economic activity. We have to live on about half of that. If we're going to allow for the abundance and diversity of life to flourish, we have to cut back about half of that. So we each need to live on about 3.5 acres of land, a substantial reduction for all our needs, for all our goods, our services, housing, every resource that we use. We need to cut back about 50% as far as the amount of land that they use land as a metric or a measurement. Another great way, Jack, of measuring it is by emissions. 80% of everything that we do and use has behind it the energy of fossil energy. So emissions are another way of sort of gauging that. And the global citizen, if you look at the 7.7 billion people out there, we all basically use on average 5 tons of CO2 a year. That's what we emit into the atmosphere for all our economic activity. Americans, we do about 20 tons, a substantial amount of CO2 into the atmosphere that we produce and emit. So when you look at 5 tons, again, we have to be at about 50% if we're going to live sustainably. We have to ratchet that back to about 2.5 tons of emissions per person across the globe to live within our carrying capacity. And again, it's a little bit hard for people to understand that concept. So I also look at it from a GDP perspective or an income perspective. And if you look at the global economy, it's about an $87 trillion economy. And if you, again, look at 7.7 billion people, that's about $11,000 per person in economic activity. And we have to cut that back by 50%. So the average person, in order to be sustainable, has to live a lifestyle on $5,500 a year. So what's interesting is 3.5 billion people live on or above that lifestyle. And the other 4 billion people live below that lifestyle. And to give you an idea what that lifestyle is, Jack, it's like living in a one-room home with minimal plumbing, minimal electricity for a few small appliances like a small electric stove, maybe a small refrigerator. It's having no central heat, no central air, no central hot water. It's not having any clothes washer or dryer. You're only having 2 or 3 sets of clothes that you hand wash and you hang out to dry. And it's eating a plant-based diet only locally, and it's not driving a car, and it's not flying in an airplane ever in your life. That is a sustainable lifestyle with 7.7 billion people. And the people who are living above that have zero interest in coming down to that level to be sustainable. And the ones who are living below that, and I've interviewed a lot of them for our films, they're fighting and clawing every day to live a better lifestyle.
Yeah, and if we were stuck at our current population, it would be one thing, but it's rapidly growing. That number that you're talking about is on a constant shifting scale, isn't it?
So as we increase these numbers, and we're talking on right now, we're adding about 80 million more people to the planet. The implications towards their freedom of choice and our freedom of choice, and the implications to sustainability grow worse every day. The conversation of population reduction, really needs to be, handled up front, transparently, honestly, and to strip away the taboo and strip away the stigma of it. And, that conversation needs to be had in every corner. And it's not, the developing world pointing at the underdeveloped world. It's, the developing world is actually the greatest perpetrators. We pollute so much more and we use so many more resources than the non-developed world.
It's really a hard discussion because there's so many fingers pointing in so many directions as to who's to blame.
No, you're absolutely right, Jack. I think that there's a lot of real reticence to discuss it because you said there's vestiges of racism, colonialism, imperialism, reproductive autonomy. There are a lot of legitimate and serious concerns. Prior human rights violations with looking at what China's one-child policy or India's sterilization program. So yes, there's some sordid history. There's some unfortunate examples, but again, if you going back to our film and going back to our website, we also show countries and we discuss countries that have had marvelous population policies that have been able to manage the growth of their citizenry and actually reduce fertility, all in the context of humane, non-coercive, and voluntary initiatives, and very successfully. And then again, it improves the entire community, both with women's and children's health. Poverty decreases. It's called a demographic dividend. You see, substantial financial security for these families that are smaller families, and you also see again, magnificent opportunities when it comes to education and economic opportunities for especially the mothers. And best of all, as I mentioned, the environment gets better. Nature does heal because there are fewer people putting that kind of pressure on the environment.
I've seen discussions with millennial types who are, opting out of having kids, and their stated reasons being it's just too dark in the future. It's just it wouldn't be responsible. And also it's expensive.
I think these younger generations are saying, I'm getting the connection here about the impact that I have on the environment. And do I want to bring children both into the world for twofold? One is because I see the impact that they will create. And when there's 7.7 billion of us, that's a massive impact. And the other question being is, do I want to bring a child into a world that may not be as good a world as I found it when I was born into it? So I do understand the moral dilemma there. And I think what's going to happen is we are going to head down this path of change. And we just need to adapt. We need to adapt to new ways of seeing the world, seeing each other, I think, with new values and new ethics. And we need to start to put systems into place, structures into place, and expectations into place that will help us cope with those, difficulties that lie ahead, find happiness where we can and where it exists, and thrive as best we can.
That biological pull comes to everyone. Usually it comes to most people anyway. And that's tough enough. It's like, wait, I should be having a kid now. Should I? Would my life be better? Whatever. But then all of this cultural conditioning backing it up through a lifetime of when you have kids and when are you having kids. And it's just expected that everyone will.
Right.
To see people at all have a discussion and just firmly put their foot down, I'm just not having kids, and that's been happening for quite a long time, but that it seems to be happening even more, is a little bit of a hope,
Right.
a little bit of a ray of hope.
And I think you're right. There is that sort of expectation. And it's interesting in our film, we try and address some of these challenges that are societally based and societal, expectations or construction. And we have a gentleman who's a professor there at bioethics from Johns Hopkins, Travis Reeder. Travis, talks just about that, how there's a sort of a justification right now that, why are you a 30-year-old woman and you don't have a child and you've been married? And where he said that, we need to learn to and gradually flip that justification to, why are you having multiple children in an environment that, may not, be a good thing to be doing that at this time. Things are incremental. Changes happen incrementally. Large changes happen incrementally. And I think societal awareness is shifting, and it just takes time and energy, and these kinds of conversations that you are having, and that even people are having at the coffee shop or across the fence to their neighbor.
Let's talk a little bit more about the film and talk a little bit more about the enormity of this project that you've been working on. I see from September 22nd, 2018, you'd put up 2 years and all kinds of other stats that have gone behind working on this project. What's it been like? What's it like behind the scenes?
Great question. I have zero experience in the documentary world, but again, being in business for 30 years, I knew what was important was to build a really great team around me, and we've done that. And it's been an eye-opening experience, not just how to film and where to film, all the processes with filming, but even more so just learning about the environment and learning about the oceans and acidification and land and how our soils are degraded and the inputs that are used for our agriculture, which is completely unsustainable, and what it's doing to the aftermath to the rivers and to the oceans. And just it's been a really eye-opening experience, just spending time in India and Japan and the Midwest and up in the northern coastline of our country here, talking with everyday people and scientists on the struggles that they're facing with dealing with the impacts of overpopulation, and they're being able to manage it from whatever it might be, whatever walk of life they're involved in.
I remember Leonardo DiCaprio coming on and doing some press and some other things after he had gone on a pretty considerable trip around the world, or a culmination of
Mm-hmm.
several trips, and some of the joie de vivre had left his face. You could visibly tell that he had seen some stuff. What kind of perspective has it given you in terms of everything that you've seen? Because very few people on this planet have put themselves in your situation and done the 50,000 miles of footage, the 200 or 250 hours of footage and 50,000 miles of travel, and probably a lot more than that now. You've seen a lot of stuff that most people haven't seen. How has that affected you?
That's a good question, Jack. I don't think I don't feel at all less hopeful. We all have to come together collectively, and we have to not be afraid to tackle tough subjects. And I get concerned when I see people focus just on one thing like climate change, or focus on one issue like plastics in the oceans. And we have to say, okay, what are the underlying causes, and what can we do as far as just stopgap measures? And I think you can lose hope when you don't see things work, like with climate change and with fossil energy. 2018 was the biggest year in history of fossil energy use. And 2019, the International Energy Agency has said we're going to go burn through an additional 500 million barrels of oil. So it's going to be far greater this year than 2018. So we're not really addressing, our fossil energy use quickly enough. So that's worrisome. But I think it's just one symptom of many symptoms, and I think we have to be focusing on the population side as well, and again, in a way that is voluntary and with enthusiasm, with understanding of all the previous problems and issues that have surrounded that topic.
Is there any difference between when you come home or when you're paying attention to the news at large and what you're seeing on the ground in terms of the people that you're meeting and the work that they're doing that really is more hopeful because they're doing the work, they're aware of the situation, that they're one of those issues at least that they're fighting? How do you reconcile the hype from what you're actually seeing out there? Or is it really close to what you're seeing out there?
I think what worries me the most is understanding that our economic activity is not diminishing. It's increasing every year, and if you look at our impact on the environment, we're just not voluntarily willing to reduce our consumption, and it's a very hard needle to move. And technology does not necessarily help us. Technology, can solve problems, but pretty much on a short-term basis. It doesn't really solve underlying issues, and sometimes just masks and delays and compounds and intensifies the problems that they were meant to solve. So I think I get what does bring me optimism is when you start to see people like what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brings up about bringing a child into this world may not be a really a healthy thing to be doing, knowing what we're facing. I think the more conversation we can have about our impacts is our numbers, and how that is, when you look at when you look at science and you look at impact, it is the greatest green strategy available, Jack, to individuals and countries. The greatest green strategy, the best carbon offsetting strategy, is to literally, have smaller families and reduce population. And when I hear more of that, and I see more of that, and I see an organization address it more that they never did in the past, that gives me hope. And it gives me hope because that really will fundamentally, get us to sustainability faster than some of these other solutions, which help, but they don't really, they won't get us there without a clear path on population.
Less people scares countries to death. I mean, there are countries out there who are, giving really weird incentives for people having more kids because they're worried
Hmm.
about their aging population going away faster than their young population. I mean, if we stop relying on fossil fuels and everything that our
Yes.
governments are propped up on, our economies are propped up on, that's going to create some chaos, isn't it?
I don't. I wouldn't say it's going to create chaos, but and then the question is if which is more chaotic and which is more of
Right.
a peril. Do we deal with when we're looking at dealing with economic and social challenges, you know, tied to slowing births is, to me, it's child's play compared to the potential ecological plights and national security perils that our country or any country will experience from a continued population growth and the overshooting of our carrying capacity and our resources. I think it's kind of foolish to think that infinite growth can be healthy. It's just it's simple logic. You just can't keep growing our population and growing economic growth forever. We have to reflect now on how we're going to protect our economies while working towards what I think should be a sustainable number of people. If we tend to ignore that, I think again nature will force it upon us, and it could be violent, it could be unexpected.
Again, one of the conversations that we had last with Randy Hayes, he was talking about for an end to industrial civilization as we knew it in the 70s. And he must have been, and he indicated that he was laughed at and treated like a radical and everything else back then. Then he's gone all of these decades watching us basically go on the same path that we were on when he made that call, and other people were making similar calls to radically change the way that we were treating our growth, how growth was done, the industrial growth, technology, and everything else. What's different in your mind about now versus then?
That's hard because I think for a lot of people they were disheartened with the IPCC over in France, and I just and America hasn't been willing to take certain steps necessary to cut back our carbon use, and I don't know if 200 countries can come together to do what's necessary on climate change. Again, that's just one symptom. I think it's such a overwhelming problem. I guess it can paralyze people because it's so overwhelming. And I think what you have to do is just on your daily basis, try and do the best you can, and be aware of what those impacts are, and try to take action in your own way.
I often try to figure out if what's happening on a macro level, with a lot of people talking about being more responsible with fossil fuel use and everything in the last, and just say the last decade. But like you said, in 2018, we had the biggest year for carbon emissions ever at this. So it's like we're talking about it, yet our emissions, like you said, are going up. Would you say that people are still paying too much lip service to these things while doing the exact opposite? Or is it an anomaly of some sort?
I think they don't understand the magnitude of what as I explained earlier in the podcast, what that lifestyle is for sustainability.
Mm.
And when they do understand it, they're not going to be, the people who are living above that lifestyle are not willing to, give up flying. They're not willing to give up. Some people may be willing to give up driving ever again. Some people will maybe willing or doing plant-based diets. And some people may have limited their appliance use, limited their electricity, and downsized into a very tiny home. But I think that is the extreme minority that have done all those steps necessary to live sustainably. And so I just don't think it's a realistic approach where once people understand it, that we have to do more than just try and reduce our economic activity. And I think it's very difficult to do that because think about this, Jack. Think about your economic activities based on your income. So you bring home your income. if you choose not to do some of those, resource, intensive, consumptive activities, what are you going to do then? You have the savings of your income. Do you just go out and replace that and do other things with it? Or do you do other types of economic activity? Or do you put it aside and save it, in which case you're putting it into the production side of the economy? And that's, again, creating growth. So it's a very difficult thing to, I think, change our affluence, worldwide affluence. I don't think people want to be forced to live, more ascetic lives, and I don't think they're voluntarily willing to do it. And that's why, again, our argument and our film is about really addressing the population factor.
There is a guy in our town that drives a bike all over the place, and he's known as I think a lot of people think in the back of their minds, the good old boys especially, there goes that hippie. He's always ridden a bike. He's always had his kid in the back of the bike with the little trailer thing, and he's never had a car and gets around just
Mm.
fine and does all of his business and everything. But that is such a radically different lifestyle that people I don't think they even look at that and see themselves in any way whatsoever doing anything, like even on a
Hmm.
Monday, not driving their car and just using a bike. And once again, it's population. We don't all have to go down to that level that you are talking about if we don't have as many people. I don't know of an easier argument that could be made, which is also why I'm so stymied by the fact that there's so few of us making it.
Right, and I think just because of the taboo and the past histories, and I think that's why it's important to really understand our ecological limits, to measure those ecological limits, and to be transparent about them. So, if we all live an American lifestyle where we're emitting 20 tons of CO2 a year, we're living off roughly $60,000 per person as far as our per person GDP, and we're living off of 22 acres per person as American. If we're all going to do that for the world, we need to have we have to live within around 1 billion people. If we're going to live more like a European lifestyle, which is about 10 tons of CO2 emissions, it's about $30,000 per person of GDP. Again, we just need to say, okay, well, how many people can that sustain, allowing for nature and the abundance of diversity and of life to be able to live compatibly with us and flourish. And that's probably about 2 billion people. And again, so I think it's really trying to understand, based on the lifestyle that we live in this country or a different country, is what is a sustainable society? What is a sustainable a population? And nature does that for every species. We've just been able to push nature away because of our ingenuity and our ability to use fossil energy to deliver water and deliver food and produce food wherever we are, and to provide us the technologies that have basically eliminated every type of potential catastrophic disease that could wipe us out or significantly reduce our numbers, and we flourished.
What are the main things that you see as we're reducing population? Let's say we've already got that ball rolling. What are the other really main things that are going to have to happen?
I guess what does a wise society do, knowing that we're in overshoot and we're going to head through this transition?
Yeah.
I think one thing that we really have to understand is that when you look at our global wealth, material consumption and energy consumption rise and fall in tandem with our global wealth. So one of the big issues that we're going to face in about 30 years, based on I read a lot from energy experts, Jack, and just Charles Hall, Alice Friedman, Tim Garrett. There are a dozen men and women who are in that field that I follow. Everything that I can read and understand is we've got about 30 years of recoverable reserves before we start to see energy constraints. And what I mean by that is fossil energy will pretty much be a scarce commodity. And 30 years is not a lot of time. And whenever there's a scarceness of energy, there's going to be a significant retraction in the economy. So we're going to have a major shift, I think, in about 30 years. And we're going to have to prioritize, our use of energy and the running of our civilization. So I think energy is a big factor. We've got to. I used to not like the idea of nuclear energy, but we've got to shift in the next 30 years to at least some level of energy that will be able to stabilize and maintain society. and we're not there where we are now as a country. So we have to get electrified. We have to put in a significant infrastructure with the grid. We've got to start to look at the nuclear options out there. When I say nuclear energy options. Whether that's some of the newer technologies that are out there. I think there's some newer ways of using the nuclear on a more localized basis. There's obviously renewables that need to be put into place too. And I think that's critical. Is the energy infrastructure in our country will go a long way to minimizing responses like panic or blame or a breakdown of any sort of law or order. And I think the world as a whole has to recognize that too. Our energy constraints in about 30 years. There are a number of other things that we can certainly do. Obviously, getting back to localized and more independent sustainability of our food systems. Being closer to the original source. The system right now, we spent a couple weeks out in the Midwest filming, is just fraught with all kinds of inputs, and it's a very fragile system, Jack. You've got significant amounts of artificial fertilizer, produced primarily by natural gas. You've got significant amount of pesticides and herbicides, and unsustainable pumping of aquifers, and it just produces these significant yields. Which when any of those inputs faces a scarcity, it's going to send reverberations through the marketplace, and we're going to have higher food prices and challenges in feeding a growing population.
Fast forward a year from now, and in a little bit, 8 Billion Angels is coming out. What's your biggest hope for the impact that all of this work that you've been doing is going to have on people?
My hope is to move the needle of awareness, to move the conversation that it's acceptable to discuss, and it's an acceptable and understandable, a conversation, and that countries start to adopt policies that take into account, their populations and their consumption and emissions of waste and consumption of resources. I think the more that that philosophy and that culture is accepted, and trying to be in harmony with nature and balance with nature, would be, to me, a ultimate outcome.
Take yourself back to your younger years. A lot of people at that age now are thinking about, they're getting all these stats. They're going to watch 8 Billion Angels. They're going to have seen all of the stats on climate change and oceans and everything else. What are the kinds of things that you would encourage if you were standing in front of a bunch of 20-somethings now, or maybe some high schoolers getting ready to graduate, about what would you like to see them go into? What kinds of things would you like them to do?
That's a tough question, because I think there's certainly awareness in the younger generations, and they're inheriting this earth. When I was a child, my father used to take us in the summers up to a bald eagle's nest up in Maine, and I remember when I was 7 years old, after going there subsequent summers for 4 or 5 years, the eagles weren't there, and my father said that they're gone. They said DDT was a major cause of that, and he walked me through what DDT was, and I was just amazed at the humans impact and the chain of the consequences that occurred, to where it went down to the getting into the eggs of the shells of the eggshells of the eagles, and not allowing them to be able to reproduce. And so I recognized that impact at a young age, and then saw signs, and the signs are getting worse and worse. So I hope people understand that the magnitude of our impact is substantial, and however they can reduce that impact, and by and large, the single greatest impact is following and pursuing a small family ethic. I think there's hope. I think there's a lot of hope.
Well, people can find out more at 8billionangels.org. That's the number 8billionangels.org. You can get on a list there to make sure that you know where screenings are going to be held when this is released. And Terry, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Rewilding Earth. And thank you so much for producing something like this. I know it's a little premature. I haven't seen it, but I think it's going to be awesome. So I think it's going to open a lot of hearts and minds as well. So thank you so much for that work.
Terrific. And I think what you guys do in Rewilding Earth is such an amazing cause. And the pursuit of what you're doing is just, to me, and I love John Davis too. I just think it's a great cause to try and rewild the earth. And we're doing our part on our end. You're doing your part. And I love working with you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. Be sure to visit rewilding.org to subscribe so you don't miss past and future episodes. And while you're there, please consider supporting Rewilding by making a donation or subscribing to the Rewilding Earth newsletter.